Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. Today on our show, we talk about how the war in the center of Europe in Ukraine can end, about the peace plan of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the reaction to it in the world. The most authoritative experts and the most inquisitive, Henry Keane.
Hello, I've been asked recently, Henry, maybe do you know what's going on in the world? Wars, conflicts, disasters, political, economical. Maybe I know. Maybe that's just us. Some say it's inhumane, but maybe this is exactly humane. Maybe we are the species, the warring species. Maybe we need the war, economical, political, and the war in the middle of Europe. What do we do about all that? Well, at least what we can do. Let's talk about that. The world will gather again to discuss peace in Ukraine and ways to stop the war. The third summit on reaching peace for Ukraine and for the world may this time take place in Turkey. Similar events have previously taken place in Denmark and Saudi Arabia. A summit at the level of national security advisors to national leaders is tentatively scheduled for the end of October in Istanbul. On the agenda, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's peace formula and his intention to hold a global summit with the world leaders later this year. According to Bloomberg, a limited number of officials will take part in the meeting. The allies hope that a Chinese representative will attend, but so far there are no firm agreements on that. It is expected also during the event that Ukraine's partners plan to convince India and Brazil to oppose Russian aggression. The first peaceful meeting of a kind previously took place in Copenhagen, followed then by consultations in the key principles of peace in Ukraine between the national security advisors of the European Union, the United States, Turkey, India, Brazil, South Africa, and a number of other states. The second such summit on the Zelensky's peace formula exactly was held in Jeddah in August this year. That time, representatives from more than 40 countries took part in it, and that is 3 times more participants than in the previous one in Copenhagen. Having more than 40 countries attending, including China, Brazil, and India, the latter peace summit in Jeddah was also attended by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, called it a super breakthrough, and it is hard to disagree.
We agree that this format, which I'm sure will expand, will be continued. We will continue to work in the preparation of the peace summit itself, after which work will begin on the implementation of each of the 10 points, and the 10th point, which will legally establish the end of this war.
These previous meetings in Copenhagen and Jeddah, respectively, and the upcoming third one, which will take place in Turkey, we are witnessing nothing else but a process of preparation for the Global Peace Summit, which Ukraine plans to host. As Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Igor Zhovko, said, it is the summit that will finally state and confirm that the world agrees that the end of the war is only possible following the points of the peace formula of President Zelenskyy. Ukraine expects firm approval of the general idea and philosophy of the peace formula from the national leaders attending the upcoming global summit in Turkey. And the fact that solely the Ukrainian peace formula can be set as a blueprint for the course of actions that is expected to bring peace to Ukraine and relief for the rest of the world. The office of President Zelenskyy wastes no time. Ukraine wants to hold a global peace summit before the end of this year. However, everything depends on the upcoming National Security Advisors meeting in Turkey, during which the exact date and location of the global summit should be determined. Some experts say this will be the inaugural summit at the highest leadership level, which will trigger the relevant processes in the world after this high-pitched level. Each of the 10 points of the Ukrainian peace formula will be separately polished, and the level of advisors, experts, and ministers discussing each respective plan's point turning into reality. Let me remind you what points the roadmap to peace, or the peace formula announced by Zelenskyy, consist of. So there are 10 points of it. The first is radiation and nuclear safety. The idea of it's obvious and very straightforward. Any use of nuclear energy must be safe, that means regulated and controlled. Ukrainian nuclear power plants and installations must operate safely under the full sovereign control of Ukraine. All Russian troops must be withdrawn from the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and its territory must be completely demilitarized. Any form of nuclear blackmail must cease to be. The second point of the formula is no less obvious and no less clear: food security. It is necessary to ensure free, full and safe navigation in the Black and Azov Seas, restore Ukraine's sovereign control over Ukrainian ports, moreover, to build new ports and expand the range of Ukrainian goods transported via sea. The third point is energy security. The destruction of critical civilian infrastructure is unacceptable. Fourth, the release of all prisoners of war and deportees. Kyiv demands that all Ukrainian citizens held in Russia and the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, in particular in Crimea, must be released by means of a full and internationally transparent process of exchange. Point number 5, the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must be restored in full, without any concessions of any sort within the international recognized borders as they were defined at the time of the Declaration of Independence of Ukraine in 1991. 6. Full withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities. 7th point, Ukraine wants the restoration of justice. That means full legal accountability for outrageous international crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine by Russia that must be ensured through proper, fair and independent investigation and prosecution, both at national and international levels. Paragraph 8, environmental safety. It notes that the war against Ukraine caused severe and widespread environmental damage. The penultimate, 9th point, is to prevent the escalation of the war and the repetition of the crime of aggression. The risk of escalation in and around Ukraine will remain until its security is guaranteed by legally binding instruments of international law, strengthened by robust indigenous defense capabilities, and for Ukraine to be integrated into new international security architecture. The final 10th point of Zelenskyy's peace formula is actual confirmation of the end of the war. This step involves the creation of a clear framework, actual bilateral confirmation of the end of the war, provision of obligations and security guarantees from the side of the aggressor, creation of proper conditions for a post-war settlement, agreement on terms of the reparations, reconstruction of the damage caused by Russia. The plan is fair, transparent, and is all about just and fair peace for Ukraine and the world. The only problem I see is that there is only one country who would probably rather go nuclear than sign it. That's right, Putin's Russia. The war, the peace, the punishment, and the crime. Terrible crime. Let's talk it over with our guest. We are happy to have as a guest Oleksandr Mererezhko, Deputy of Ukraine Chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Hello, Mr. Mererezhko.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My first question: under what conditions do you think the vision of a global peace summit becomes a reality?
Well, I think that it is already becoming a reality, but of course, to make it a sort of comprehensive peace global summit, we need to invite and to attract as many countries as possible. And I think that we already have enough countries which have agreed to join this peace summit.
So, what reaction Ukraine actually expects from the world, and what kind of a support, if rather said?
Well, first of all, our primary goal is, of course, to implement the peace formula by the President Zelenskyy. And it became known that this peace formula, which consists of 10 points, gives an opportunity for each country to sort of pick and choose. If, for example, one of the country is eager to join only 1 or 2 points of this peace formula, it's perfectly okay. For example, energy security or global food security. And we expect to implement this peace formula and to start the process of reform of the global security system and the United Nations organization also.
Obviously, some of Ukraine partners support all of Zelensky's peace formula, I've heard that, we know that. In some paragraphs, and for some countries, it can be called a great success if they support to join one paragraph. Which paragraph of the formula might you think inside discussions the most in attempts to somehow rewrite, to change the Ukrainian vision of a just peace?
Well, each point of this formula deserves attention and implementation, but the formula is structured in such a way which starts with the issues in which are supposed to be interested most countries or all the countries in the world. For instance, the first point of this formula is nuclear security. And I'm sure that there cannot be any disagreements regarding nuclear security. And maybe one of the most difficult points of this formula for some countries, especially global south, might be the issue of accountability, bringing to justice all the perpetrators and war criminals. It might create some, I would say, political issues, but for some countries. But at the same time, in principle, I believe that each country should also be interested in implementation this point also.
Well, Mr. Mererezhko, I'm absolutely with you. But another question is, why do you think some countries, I know exactly what countries you're talking about, but why these countries having that issue of accountability? I mean, this is the crime and the punishment, isn't it? Russia is killing people every day in Ukraine. And what? Just to let it go? To forget it?
Well, exactly. You see that I'm also professor of international law, and all my life I devoted to international law. And I know that we cannot talk about effective international legal system unless we have accountability. Because when we deny accountability, it leads to undermining the whole system of international law. That's why it's crucially important to persuade all the countries in the world to bring to justice the perpetrators, those war criminals who committed horrible crimes against humanity, war crimes and crime of aggression, because it is in the interests of each country to support in this way international law. Because now we have Ukraine as a victim of the aggression. Tomorrow it might be any other country in the world. That's why we should be united in implementing accountability.
When we are talking between each other right now about the countries, what we really mean by that is some politicians that needed to be persuaded in this, maybe even forced, talked, I don't know, do something about anything, because some countries like, for example, Israel is the nation and the government are absolutely clearly divided. The nation helps Ukraine, the government is, I don't know, pro-Russian or neutral, which I'm not talking about what is going on now, but how can you be neutral to an absolute disaster in the heart of Europe and just because you're far away, well, you're not, obviously. So these politicians that are now having their voices and raising their red flags and are not ready for accountability of the criminals, maybe they can be forced if they are called the criminals just as well. Just as a question from me.
You're right that we cannot be neutral when it comes to crimes against humanity, acts of genocide. And I can recall the words of President Kennedy, who came to Ireland and said, talking to the parliament of this country, he said that Ireland is a neutral country, but it is not neutral in the face of the struggle between tyranny and freedom. And I also believe that countries cannot be neutral when a genocide takes place, when act of aggression takes place, because these are crimes committed not only against one particular country, in this regard, Ukraine. It's a crime committed against the whole international community, against each country and against each person in the world.
Okay, I hate to even imagine a situation like that, but are there any points on which Kyiv would accept a compromise? I repeat, a compromise, not a discussion, because Kyiv is obviously ready for compromise, for discussion. But the compromise is a totally different thing. If you compromise, it seems to me, even one point, one paragraph of this formula, you compromise the just peace, and you're going right to appeasement of the criminal authority of Kremlin, and that's it. But maybe I have to ask the question, would Kyiv accept a compromise on any points of this formula, do you think?
Well, I think that some points can be discussed, and there can be some kind of compromise. But it's easier to say where we cannot have compromise. We cannot have compromise when it comes to principles of international law. Among these principles are principles of territorial integrity, principle of sovereign equality of states, principle of the non-use of force in international relations. There cannot be compromised on these principles.
The last question, a very short one. If you can provide me with a fair and short answer, that would be just lovely. If that would be up to you to decide, what sanctions you would put onto Russia so they would not be able to circumvent it in any way?
Well, first of all, we need total isolation of the aggressor state. And I can give it an example, the Covenant of the League of Nations. It gave an answer in one of its articles what should be done when one state starts war against the other. And it was about total isolation. The aggressor should be totally isolated, punished, and reparations should be imposed on it.
Thank you very much for your time, for your expertise, and for what you do. It was nice to have you. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much for this interesting conversation. And now, no matter how I don't like it, I have an assistant. And this artificial assistant has an artificial intelligence that is probably way greater than mine. Let's ask my assistant the question, a tricky one. What is common at the end of all wars on the face of this earth?
What is common at the end of all wars is the desire for peace and the need to rebuild and heal. Here are some common elements that tend to occur at the end of wars. Peace treaties. Most wars conclude with the signing of peace treaties or agreements between the warring parties. Demilitarization. A key aspect of many peace agreements is the demobilization. Post-war reconciliation. Global consequences. While the specific circumstances of each war can vary, these common elements illustrate the universal desire for an end to conflict and the beginning of a new era of stability.
Watch this.
Zelensky's peace formula is the only peace initiative in which the international community remains to be interested in, said the head of European diplomacy, Josep Borrell. Work is currently underway in the European Union to bring this formula to the global level so that it becomes the basis of future peace, he said.
The only one that attracts the attention and the work of the international community is President Zelensky's peace formula. It is, we can say, the only game in town.
Watch this.
So what is peace and what is war? For who? What is just peace in Ukraine? Does it really mean the just peace for the rest of the world? Let's discuss this hard matter with our next guest. We are happy to have Maria Holub with us, expert on European integration and bilateral relations between Ukraine and the EU. Maria, hello.
Hello.
Let's start with the first question. And are there any points in Zelensky's peace formula where Kyiv should accept a compromise, you think?
There is a very quick and very immediate and crystal clear answer to your question. And this answer is no.
Great.
Because this peace formula was designed in a way to achieve a long-lasting and sustainable peace in the region and on the continent and around the globe. That's why, and all the 10 points of this peace formula are designed in a way to facilitate each other and to work together in a very organic, let's say, way. That's why it is very clearly mentioned in a couple of points that no compromise is possible and no negotiations are possible, especially when it comes to the peace talks and to the restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
I've been recently asked, twice I was asked, what could be that thin red line, a turning point for events, at the front line or in the world, which can lead Ukraine to reconsider its uncompromising position? I have my own answer, but I would love to hear it from you.
There is this very clear understanding and the internal compromise, let's put it like that, in Ukraine, that we will fight till the very end. I mean, for us, it's first of all, the existential threat and the matter of survival as a nation, but we will try to keep high on the agenda the question of justice and accountability. For the long-lasting peace, it's important not only to win this war and to win this war faster, but also to see behind the bars all those who committed these awful, atrocious crimes against Ukraine. That's why, as long as this compromise, internal compromise, is there is no way we can have any kind of political compromise or arrangements from whoever.
Well, you have to understand, Maria, that people that are asking me these questions actually don't really care for Ukraine. They don't like war, but they don't really understand what is it. They don't understand what is it like to lose the family one day just like that, in a moment. And it is going on right now as we speak, every day and every moment, but people are tired. They really want to stop it. And they're looking for ways out, you know, they feel bad all about that and everything. So this is not really a question, it was an answer. But thank you very much for providing a firm and clear answer to my audience that might from time to time think that to end the war in Ukraine is up only to Zelenskyy or some politician. No, it's the nation, the Ukrainian nation, that decides that it goes for it until the full victory, because this is exactly the matter of survival. It's not provocative, maybe a little bit. These formulas paragraphs, Zelenskyy's peace formula paragraphs, are they agreed with the West in general and with the United States in particular as the main ally of Ukraine?
You know what? We have been in our discussions and negotiations with the European Union and with our NATO allies for quite a long time. So Ukraine knows how to negotiate and how to make this, let's say, smart talks and smart diplomacies in a good sense of it. So I can only reassure you that the position was well agreed with the key players, and we also have Mr. Rasmussen well involved in the ongoing and strategic activities basically in everything which is related to the peace formula. Additionally, there is a document called Kiev Security Compact, and these two let's say, fundamental strategies really work well. They complement each other, especially when it comes to the long-lasting security guarantees Ukraine needs. And it is a very clear line, very well accepted by our partners in the US and in the European Union, that for us, security talks and then the discussions what to do next are very much linked to our European integration efforts and to the NATO path of Ukraine. So these elements really unite all key stakeholders around this idea that we will need to come together with the answers that are that will be very well accepted, I need to stress it again, by the Ukrainian population and Ukrainian nation as the whole.
Looking forward to it, looking forward to a global peace summit that will actually make an effort to a global peace. I believe very much that this is exactly what we all need. Thank you very much, Maria, for what you do and for your time with us. It was lucky to have you.
It was a pleasure and honor.
Thank you so very much. Goodbye. The more I talk with experts, or with people who think that they're experts in international politics, the more I start to understand that they don't know what is going to happen. They can't predict anything. The peace is fragile. Let's talk for more about that.
Watch this.
For multiple and obvious reasons, an option of freezing the war is not an option for Ukraine. In the case of a freezing of the current situation in Ukraine, it is clear to anyone who has not yet lost his mind what would happen then. Russia will use a respite so that to restore its weakened military potential successfully destroyed by the Ukrainians. Then, experts say that by 2028, Russia will have enough force to attack other countries again, in particular the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, during the opening of the summit of the European Political Community in Granada, Spain. According to Zelenskyy, I quote, "If Russia is allowed to adapt now, by 2028, the Kremlin will be able to restore the military potential we have destroyed, and Russia will have enough power to attack the countries that are within the focus of Russian expansion." According to Zelenskyy, this is exactly what Russia is looking for, the opportunity to freeze and adapt, as well as Russia draws conclusions, of course, from its mistakes and prepares to move on. Ukraine obviously is not going to agree to any alternative options, such as, for example, to trade its territories for NATO membership. In August, the Chief of Staff of the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Alliance, Sten Jensen, light-heartedly suggested that Ukraine might be able to join NATO if it would renounce its territories already occupied by Russia. In Kyiv, such a statement caused surprise and indignation. Mr. Jensen was sharply criticized, in particular by the Council of Security and Defense of Ukraine, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Office of the President. The inner chemistry of Zelensky's peace formula. How? When? Who? Let's discuss that with our next guest. We are lucky to have Mr. Petras Austrevicus today with us, a member of the European Parliament, currently in Brussels. Is that right? Hello. Hello.
Yes, pleasure, man. Yes, I'm in Brussels, the European Parliament in full stream.
My question to you, maybe you will ask it to your friends in European Parliament at full stream. Is there even any room for compromise that the West can discuss even in regard with the Ukrainian vision of just peace? Is this the only way for peace? Or is it maybe considered some options?
You know, I translate to myself the sentence or kind of principle, which was expressed by many high EU officials. We will support Ukraine as long as it takes. I would put until victory, until full victory on the Ukrainian side. So that explains me, I mean, the full essence and meaning of support for Ukraine to achieve victory and to get the full security and sovereignty under control. So only that explains me in full extent to what extent, I mean, this peace model or peace formula might work. Maybe others might think, you know, we have to compromise and go for something else in between. Frankly, I don't see anything in between.
Exactly.
Looking at the looking at the Russian behavior, Russian brutalities and aggressiveness and readiness, I mean, to continue that war and mobilizing all national resources. Look, we have to be serious, and we have to have this understanding from the very start.
Yeah, well, you're just appeasing the monster. You're feeding it, so you will keep on devouring everything. So, but just please educate us and me and my audience. Why is it so dangerous, not only for Ukraine, but also for the Western world, to make any concessions or any agreements with Russia? I know it, but I want my audience to be sure that European Parliament at full stream knows it just as well.
You know, if the West, you know, extends this kind of the unclear policy towards Ukraine, and if we seeing this situation, we don't, you know, do things rightly, what might happen? Russia's aggressiveness will will remain. I mean, it might only increase. Ukraine is only probably a beginning of the Russian aggression against the West, against its neighbors. If we appease Russia, if we don't handle the situation very, very seriously, and we don't, defend Ukraine as our partner, as a part of our political, economic, and security system, believe me, I mean, man-eater never stops. Man-eater pretends, to go after second potential victim, or victim. So that's why, we will give each and every argument for those Russian warmongers and nationalists to speak about, prevalence of Russia, Russia's right to decide the future of third countries as they wish. So that's why, it's really, it's an expensive, I would say, formula for Ukraine. But Ukraine is really kind of, test case for not only for itself, but for our common future.
Yeah, but I hear people talking like, it's not in the kitchens even, in very high offices. I hate to even think about it, but what territories one might be thinking about if the war between Russian Federation and Ukraine is to be frozen or ends up in a certain compromise? Like, is it possible? Is this scenario possible that the West says Ukraine needs to give up some territories? Do you think?
It sounds like, something, unbearable to me. But I hear some voices like this. I do hear, unfortunately, and those voices probably, they are like, traditional Western compromise principle. You have to give those aggressors something, appease them in order to, keep them at the situation at least for a while. But, I think the 20th century history as well, from 2014 to 22, we saw the same repetition of that wrong principle. Aggressors might be appeased for a short while, but they wake up. They extend their, aggression further on. So that's why it doesn't work. It doesn't work. For one-day politicians, as I call sometimes, there are this kind of, let's say, cast of politicians. Yes, they prefer, to go this way, but it might solve one-day problem, but create yearly or multi-yearly problems for many more in neighborhoods.
Well, when it comes to the actual thing, because the voices are voices, but when it comes to an actual opportunity offered to President Zelenskyy to freeze the war, I would love to see this politician doing that. I would love to see anyone just coming to Volodymyr Zelenskyy's office and said, Mr. Zelenskyy, I have the way out for us out of your war. Just give up some territory of Ukraine. The office of Ukraine, the office of the president of Ukraine, has numerously, repeatedly explained it to the world why we can't give a part of our body to a monster to appease him and to wait until it devours the rest of the body. It will never happen. So the voices will be heard now and then, and they can walk back and forth and talk it to each other. But I am absolutely sure that it is impossible to deliver the message even to President Zelenskyy, let alone making him to give up the territories of Ukraine, because Mr. Zelenskyy is the president of Ukraine, and Ukraine will never allow it. The nation will never allow that.
And I do believe that this principle is not just a, kind of the principle written on paper.
Right.
It must be an effectively implemented principle. And by this, President of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, he defends not Ukraine only. He defends the international law and the best principles of humanity. Otherwise, we go, into the world where stronger prevail, which is a collapse of everything we have created in 20th century.
Well, but people are people. They are living in different circumstances. There maybe, do you believe the West is just tired of the war in general and the Ukrainian agenda in particular? And the request is to end this as quickly as possible, at any cost, even that not acceptable for Ukraine. So what? Do you think some people would be ready to propose that, not to Zelenskyy, but to European nations?
Look, the Western politics are made not only by responsible politicians.
Look, there
are many populists. I mean, there are extreme right-wing supporters and politicians, and extreme left, like communists and the rest. And those would definitely go for that principle. I mean, they would compromise at the expense of Ukraine easily. I mean, with no blink of eye. I mean, it's like given. To me, it's like a principle which, unfortunately, I see here in the European Parliament repeated by those representatives again and again. It's not just a theoretical principle. We have to be very serious. And we have to, to be, again, responsible in order to keep this mainstream policy group together in order to prevail and in order to have enough votes to decide as a majority, as a solid majority upon our, I would say, comprehensive policy package.
Thank you very much for your answer and for your attitude, just by the way. Well, indeed, partners and allies are helping Ukraine with all of it, you name it. There's significant amounts of funding and military and other aid by Western partners. But it's Ukrainians who pay the highest imaginable price. I mean, the folk lives on their best. They're just losing the best folk, the lives of civilians. Whole families are wiped out, brutally murdered by Russia every day. Like it happened, for example, in Grozar village. Horrific. Still, sometimes not too openly, here and there, every now and then, some complain that Ukraine has been fighting for its survival and sovereignty, I quote, I literally quote you, some politicians, for way too long. So do you believe that there is a sort of a, thin red line after crossing which the United States of America and European Union can just start forcing Kyiv to concede in any way?
I don't want to go into that way of thinking. I think it would be too much. Look, we just witnessed Hamas terror kind of offense against Israel. Hundreds, thousands of people were killed. But in the discussion within our political group, Renew Europe, I mentioned now we are speaking about terrorism, Hamas terrorism attacks against Israel. But let's not forget Bucha, Irpin, Izum, and we can go. I mean, there are, different kinds of crimes of this nature, organizations-based, but there are state-sponsored. And to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's terrorism. It's terrorism against civilians. It's terrorism against the sovereignty of others. So that's why I would be very, very critical. I don't know how about the extending the hand to shake to those politicians who offer such risky, ungrounded plans as sometimes we hear. I mean, let's make a peace at any condition. The sooner the better. Probably they don't read books of history. Probably they don't analyze, psychosocial phenomena of those who are behind those crimes. So you can't contain them. You have to fight them, and you have to defeat them. Only then you will be safe and well.
I have nothing to add to it. Just my next question, maybe. So Ukraine says it will fight as long as it might be necessary, of course. And the West says it will support Ukraine as long as it might be necessary. Every new day means new death, both in the front line and among civilians in Ukraine. What needs to be done, literally, so that the Ukrainian peace formula becomes the reality ASAP, as soon as possible, And the war really ends with a just peace and not the appeasement of the aggressor, no matter what the voices are saying. Maybe more weaponry.
You know, I see, two-track way, towards this. Indeed, we have to increase and enhance Ukraine's capacity to withstand, mainly speaking about financial resources as well as weapons as much as we can. You know what we have to do now? We have to really switch to a war economy in Europe. So we have to start mass production, joint production with Ukrainians, with anybody who wants to support Ukraine in this way. Weaponry, ammunition. It shouldn't be, big plans, but small, medium-sized companies, as many as possible. This war, it's artillery, it's drones, everything. But Ukrainians need a lot of ammunition. On the second hand, so we have still to do a lot to, isolate Russia's economy. As long as Russia is able to finance its war, and still it is, looks like, we are part of this process. Sorry, we trade with Russia. We buy oil, we buy some products, we export to Russia, and some export goods are used again against Ukraine, against other neighbors. So if we are not on this two-track way or path, we will not see anything changing for better. We will simply extend a war 1 year, 2 years, 3 years more. Still, Russia is not going to change its policy unless it's isolated and pushed down by all our, kind of integrated policy line.
No matter how I want it, I don't believe that Russia can be actually isolated, not because the world cannot do it. If the United States and Germany and Europe would really want it, the war would be over yesterday. But I think that this is very profitable for everyone else to keep things like that going. The war is the mother of the sin, and it is a very profitable sin. So, but let me slide to my next question in that regard. What kind of a solid document must it be? The Bible of all documents that would state the end of the war and its non-repetition again. What kind of a document could it be?
When Ukrainian leadership, the president or prime minister will sign an act of accession to the European Union, when the president of Ukraine will sign an act of accession to NATO, I think those two major solid documents will be probably a basis for Ukraine's integration, because only memberships in those major Western organizations might become a great, and enough of guarantee for Ukraine's sovereignty and stability in future. But of course, we have to think further on. We have to think about the multilateralism as a tool to prevent those crimes of such magnitude could be repeated again. So, and there is nothing, yet we have to offer for smaller countries. Bigger ones, which become aggressors, they still have the right for initiative. Probably we have to rethink the whole set of international conventions, which might, prevent future aggressors from repeating that kind of crimes.
Thank you so very much. What I loved about your answer is that both documents that could contain Russia and could actually be considered solid documents of ending the war are not signed with Russia. It's NATO and EU, because you probably can't believe Russia. Well, as Zelenskyy said perfectly well, and I've witnessed that in United Nations personally, he said, if you want to know if Putin can be trusted, go ask Prigozhin about that. So, yeah, it was lovely to hear. Thank you so very much, Mr. Petrovich, for your time and for your experience. As usual, it was a lovely conversation with you. Thank you.
Watch this.
Alternatives to peace, alternatives to war. I hear that every now and then, but only from the people that are not from Ukraine. They don't really care how the war will end, as soon as it ends as soon as possible. In February 2023, China proposed its peace plan and also appointed a special representative even on this issue. Among the 12 points of Chinese proposal was respect for the sovereignty of all countries, a cessation of hostilities, and promotion of grain exports, while at the same time there was no mention of the withdrawal of Russian troops. Whoops! In May, the Vatican announced a secret peacekeeping mission. I mean, announcing a secret peacekeeping mission is a nice thing to do. Pope Francis confirmed that he is ready to help Ukraine in negotiations on the return of abducted children from Russia. Another peace plan was presented by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He called for the creation of a group of, I quote, neutral countries, specifically for the start of peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Let me remind you one thing. Earlier that he stated that Crimea should be given to Russia. Indonesia also proposed its own peace plan. It's like a trend these days. The essence of that initiative is immediate ceasefire, withdrawal of troops on each side 15 kilometers from the front line, and creation of a demilitarized zone, creation of a peacekeeping mission under the auspice of the UN, holding referendums with the participation of the UN in disputed territories. Representatives of African countries came from the tour to Kiev and Moscow. Mexico and Italy also came up with their own action plans. During the last General Assembly, Zelenskyy once again emphasized that there is no alternative to Ukrainian formula.
And I am aware of the attempts to make some shady dealings behind the scenes. Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises. Please, hear me. Let unity decide everything openly. While Russia is pushing the world to the final war, Ukraine is doing everything to ensure that after Russian aggression, no one in the world will dare to attack any nation. Weaponization must be restrained. War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home. And the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it. And we will do it. Slava Ukraini!
While officials in high offices are discussing how to end the war, on paper, the Ukrainian military is stopping the war on the battlefield every minute. And while this war continues and takes more and more resources, Kiev needs constant support and weapons. Let's delve into Zelenskyy's peace formula again, into very chemistry of it. Let's discuss it with our next guest. Our next guest, Mr. Bohdan Ferens, candidate of political science, founder of the public organization SD Platform. Hello, Mr. Ferens. Hello, Bohdan.
Yeah, good afternoon.
My first question. Ukraine enjoys to have many partners and allies and friends worldwide. But if you look at the map of the world society closely, there's still many countries that are, well, so to speak, hesitatingly silent. They do not support the Russian Federation openly, however, do not condemn it and do not cut ties with it. So the voices of these countries, offering what they call alternatives to Zelensky's peace formula, the voices on the world's political arena, how loud they are, and could it come to the point that these voices will be sounding louder than the voice of the country that actually is fighting for freedom, Ukraine? Do you think?
I think that, yeah, we have different, geographical parts.
Right.
It means that every country just has their own interests. And unfortunately, also we can just observe that some big powers like China, for example, like India, they are still continuing cooperating with Russia. But at the same time, they are just also quite interested in further cooperation with the Western countries, with the US. That's why in this context, we, as Ukrainians, we have to fight for every just country, every nation, every political force in these countries, because it means that now Russians are trying to push more harder these propaganda narratives, and I'm trying to follow the internal media in China, in India, for example, in some other countries from the global south, and unfortunately, they're quite often just targeting different audiences and politicians. That's why I think that it's quite not so easy to just change the position of these countries, such as China, India, Indonesia, maybe Brazil, by the way, from Latin America. But at the same time, they could be quite interested in finding some solutions in the context of nuclear safety, of ecological issues, on product safety. That's why we need to somehow also deepen our cooperation in these countries and leaders.
Thanks a lot for this answer. But let us talk for more action. I mean, what is that Ukrainian diplomacy can and should do in order to persuade the countries that had chosen, I don't know how to call it, let's call it neutrality, to support Ukraine finally and condemn Russia, because Russia is a perpetrator of the crime of aggression and there can't be no neutrality. So what do we do as a society, as a Ukrainian diplomacy? If that would be for you to decide, what would you do?
I would just start from more deeper understanding in internal just context, and internal political actors. The first point that I want to mention. The second point is that we need to be more active at different levels of formal diplomacy and informal diplomacy. I'm a fan of informal diplomacy. I believe that inter-party, for example, diplomacy could be and must be sometimes much more influential. But at the same time, it's necessary also to understand that we have some also limitation, for example, in targeting some political forces or politicians. That's why we can use the channels or the influence for our partners, For example, when with some countries, for example, we don't have or didn't have such a deep economical relationships, and we are not maybe so important for this. For some countries, we can just, and we should take into account that US or Western markets could be more, interested for such a countries, and using this our cooperation, we can just target it, some other politicians. But at the same time, also Africa, now we are just more active in this region. The region is very just unique, I think, in the context of different countries with different level of cooperation with US, West, and Russia. But at the same time, I hope that we truly understand that now we are fighting, as I mentioned, for each country.
Soviet Union had ties with Africa. Yes, Soviet Union indeed. But Russia is not the Soviet Union in terms of power and in terms of political influence. They may be striking a pose, but they can't do it. But what if what if Ukrainian diplomacy just let them play the game until they make a mistake? Maybe that's the way, because they are all about the past. They think that they can, I don't know, reinstate Soviet Union, but they can't. But the African countries, why Ukraine needs the loyalty of African countries? Can you explain, like say, in three steps, just for my audience, please?
Yeah, okay. The first step is a big region, and a lot of countries just also influence somehow on the global agenda. The worst of global south is much more visible now and heardable. That's why I think we have to just work with this topic. The second point is that Russia, unfortunately, is still so active in this region, and China also. And we will see more challenges in the context of these geopolitical clashes between these powers. And the third point is that a lot of African countries are really dependent on our grain and it means that we have this common interest, and it means that we also can just work with this, deepen our cooperation, trying to just share some arguments why global South should be more on the side of Ukraine, not like on the neutral position. But at the same time, it is a long-term, I think, process, not like a fast track.
Okay. Okay, you mentioned China. This November, Chinese leader Xi Jinping will meet Joe Biden in the United States of America. American newspapers write that the countries want to improve diplomatic relations. What shall we all expect? How will Beijing's policy towards Ukraine and Russia can possibly change after that, if you have any ideas?
I'm not sure that the Beijing policy will change on Ukraine after this meeting, because they are trying to use this kind of situation in global area to just promote their own interest. And for their own interest, for example, the tactical cooperation with weakening Russia is quite a priority, in opposing the Western countries and the US. But at the same time, I think this visit could be quite resultive in the context of the US election. And for Biden personally, it is quite also useful to show the voters that, okay, I am the guy who are just trying to work with this difficult situation with Taiwan, with Russian war and so on. But as I mentioned, I don't expect such a big changes after this meeting in the context of the position of China on Russian war in Ukraine.
Is there anything we can do, we as the world united around Ukraine and Ukraine as the center of the world's diplomacy, because this is the fact, now to change China's attitude towards Ukraine, or maybe to change China's attitude towards Russia?
From a realistical point of view, I'm a fan of this kind of approach. The main aim now, for global West, just to avoid China to be involved in deeper military cooperation with Russia. I think it is the main target for now, and it is a big threat. This kind of diplomacy and understanding for China, Western market was and still is a priority. That's why I think, from my perspective, that for China, during this period of global processes, the clever approach is not to be involved in military cooperation with Russia. Maybe in the future they will change this in the new contexts, but for now we see that maybe they are cooperating somehow through the North Korea, who knows, but at the same time openly I think they are trying to avoid this because they think that without sanctions from West for their economy, for their interest, it's much more better to work.
Or maybe Xi Jinping is not the only leader of China, and we should be able to reach to some other powers that are ready to take his place, because who knows? But anyway, your advice...
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. There's no sure... Yeah, there's no sure thing about anything in the world these days. But maybe, we have to be realistic about it. If we can't change Xi Jinping's attitude to Ukraine, that doesn't mean that we can't influence Chinese people's attitude towards Ukraine, because I have friends in China, in Beijing, and I know what I'm talking about. But this is a hard issue, but it doesn't mean we don't have to address it, just forget about it. Exactly, we have to keep our diplomacy, and we have to be looking for new ways, and maybe the new power in China is also a possibility for Ukrainian diplomacy. I'm just picking a question, that's it, nothing else. Thank you very much for your time with us today, Mr. Ferens, and it was a pleasure to talk to you. Tonight we discussed inner chemistry of Zelensky's peace formula, and I believe it is quite obvious for our audience and for the rest of the world that Zelensky, as the president of Ukraine and Ukrainian nation, has to achieve two major goals. First is to win the war against the Russian aggression, and the second one, to win the peace globally. And the world, at least that part that calls itself civilized, should be keeping support Ukraine until the war is over with a victory. Thank you so very much.